Good evening, everybody. It's lovely to be back in your city, in your country. It's somewhere I visit a lot, and I must admit it feels like home to me. And the thing I like the most is the people. So if you can just indulge me for a second, I'm just going to take a photo of you, because you're all looking particularly wonderful this evening. Thank you to Vasilios and his team for an amazing conference, and for organising the whole event and for inviting me to participate. Now, what I want to talk to you about it's something to do with our whole business ethos, and it's to do with this principle of more with less, and embracing chaos to drive change, which sort of ties back into the theme of the conference. And that theme is embracing chaos in a smart world. Now, it took me a little while to get my head around the chaos part of that, and I'll explain to you why that caused me a few sort of bit of time, bit of deep thinking. But I just want to explain this idea of more with less. It's about a concern that we have for the amount of resource depletion that is happening in the world at the moment. And so we need to create architecture which uses less stuff, but we still want it to be wonderful, we still want it to be beautiful, we still want it to give people that kind of warmth and that feeling that they get. And there's a nice little play on words with Mises' famous quote, "Less is more." He was driving towards a stylistic version of less. We are driving towards a resource consciousness use of less. Now, I'm going to talk to you about sustainability, because that is what we as a practice are known for. We've been doing it for 40 years, and we are in the midst of a climate crisis. Now, our company vision is to commit to resource-conscious architecture that is elegant in its simplicity and creative with generosity. So it still needs to use less stuff, but it still needs to be rich, it still needs to be of the highest quality. But also I want to talk to you about how we operate our business as well, because that is as important as the architecture that we create. And so we engage in ethical business operations that are rooted in an ethical approach, openness, and restless innovation. And by embracing this idea of chaos, we believe this approach can help to create a smarter world. Now, chaos. Chaos is the word that threw me when the invitation came through, because in the UK, we certainly think of chaos as disorder and confusion. But of course, chaos in Greek mythology is to do with that sort of void state from which creation springs, from which new ideas spring. So with that kind of shift in understanding, I've sort of put together some thoughts that tie the work that we're doing into that. Are we at a point of chaos? Well, if you take the version of chaos that I understood beforehand, yes, we certainly are. The world is in a bit of chaos, is in a bit of crisis from an environmental point of view. But we're also at a point of chaos where that crisis is driving innovation. It's forcing things to change very quickly, and that has an excitement to it. And we're at the center of embracing that chaos to drive that change. Some people, it can be said that change is the only constant, and it brings with it all sorts of, exciting uncertainty. So how smart is humanity in the way that we treat the planet? How do we react to it, even before AI and smart world technologies kind of take over and are fully deployed? Well, I think the answer to the question is, how smart is humanity in terms of how it treats the planet? I think the answer is probably not very. There is irrefutable evidence about the climate crisis, and there are some particularly alarming statistics around about resource depletion rates. Humanity consumes the equivalent of 1.7 Earths of stuff in our everyday lives. The average American citizen consumes 5.1 Earths of stuff. In Greece, you consume 2.6, and in the UK, I consume 4.1. We cannot carry on like that as a planet, because we would just run out of things. So our focus as a practice is on upfront carbon. And by that, what I mean is the carbon that it takes to make the architecture that we make. And as architects, we are at the center of those kind of choices, which empowers us to make responsible decisions. So we need to get smart, and we need to get smart now, and we need to try and find that way of doing more with less. As an architecture practice, we are also very much aware of the impact that we have as a business. And the very small dot there, that's the average employee carbon footprint of the people who are in our practice. The next one is the impact of our business. So individuals, business, and then the really big one that's not possible to get it all on the page is the upfront carbon that's taken to construct all of the projects that we completed in 2021. A huge amount of carbon, a huge amount of resource. We need to get the size of that circle back down, and ultimately we need to get it such that I can actually get it onto a slide properly. So how do we go about doing that? I mean, we've been pushing at the frontier of sustainability for 40 years, and we're trying to practice what we preach. We set ourselves really tough targets. As members of staff, we try to abide by a 1.5 degree business and lifestyle commitment. And we're also a B Corp, a B Corporation, so we're a sustainable and ethical business, and we've just had our re-accreditation and scored the highest score of any architectural practice in the world. And that sort of speaks volumes for what it is that we are trying to do. So where did it all begin? Well, it all began here, nearly 40 years ago with this building. Apologies that the picture looks a bit grainy and a bit old. That's because it is. It was taken 40 years ago. And it's of a building which was the first major low-energy building in the United Kingdom at that time. And we were practicing sustainability before sustainability was even the commonly used word that it is now. So we have been right there, right from the start, restlessly pushing forward. Come full circle, or come all the way forward to today. This is where we're at the moment. This is what we're currently doing. So this is a scheme in central London called Timber Square. It's the first major net zero carbon scheme in the city. It's also the first major use of timber in a central London scheme, going up to about 16, 17 stories. It's about reuse. It's about reusing an existing building and adapting and bringing that forward. And so there's that whole kind of combination of those kind of things. And we are cutting the amount of upfront carbon that it takes to build a building like this in half. We're using half what it would normally take to build a building like this. But we still want it to be a great building. So whilst it's lean, whilst it has no fat on it, it's also a rich mix of uses. It's got real character, it's got real personality. The structure is on show, the finishes are on show, the timber is on show, and there is a kind of, a real, almost like a city within that building. And it's a very different type of workplace, so that it has a magnetic quality, because from the pandemic, we can't expect people to commute anymore. We have to encourage people to commute to work. And so creating great workplaces is a really important part of that. But also, we need to understand how much stuff it takes to make a building. So this image here is one that we created, and it's how much stuff is needed to make the 10 square meters of that building, which is, at the densities that we use, that is the occupancy space for one person. Look at all that stuff. It's, that is us being responsible, trying to push hard. We need to get that pile of stuff right the way down to something much more lean and responsible. So we're on a journey. And we're on a journey with major corporates. This is Meta's headquarters in central London at King's Cross. And again, this is another scheme that is cutting the amount of embodied carbon in half by a whole, a concerted effort by tenant, by developer, by architects, by engineers, by contractors. So it is feasible but it takes teamwork. And then taking sustainability up to the city scale, and understanding what that means, understanding how that can be made explicit. But when we're doing stuff at city scale, we always think about the people first. What we must do is create places that people feel comfortable in, and so we design the places, the spaces, the squares, the streets first, and then we fit the buildings around them so that the buildings are complementary to what the public realm requires. But we're doing this scheme here in central London at the moment. It's the biggest piece of the River Thames frontage that's been redeveloped in 70 years, 9 buildings, 100,000 square meters. And what it's looking at is all sorts of things, but from a sustainability point of view, it's aiming to be totemic. It's aiming to make a statement about what sustainability can be. So it's about placemaking, but it's also about reuse. There are some substantial existing buildings that are in there that are being reshaped for a new life. We're looking at biogenic materials, timber, load-bearing stone. We're looking at biodiversity as well with a sort of planted roofscape. And so something that sits very prominently on the Thames hopefully will send a message to people about what the future of cities starts to need to look like. So that's looking into the future. We're also trying to take the existing building stock. It's a huge issue for us. It's probably the biggest issue that we have to deal with in the UK. And I know from my time in Athens, it's also something that you have to confront very significantly indeed, partly due to your planning regulations. But this is an example of how, what is achievable, even with a building like this that is very heavily listed. So this is the highest level of heritage listing that it's possible to have. It looks like it comes out of the Harry Potter film set. It's got that sort of quality to it. It's actually an old hospital. It's an infirmary hospital. And it was originally designed to keep people apart. To keep people apart to stop the contagion of disease, to stop disease spreading. Now what we've done is we've flipped that 180 degrees back in on itself, and it's now a building which is about bringing people together. So we're trying to encourage the contagion of ideas. So avoid the contagion of disease, encourage the contagion of ideas. And that's required some radical surgery, some kind of brave moves, but has brought a building which has already done a great service to the people of Edinburgh and bring it through to give it another 100 years of life at least. And rather nicely, it was selected by Prix Versailles as one of the most beautiful university campuses in the world when it was voted on last year. Biogenic materials is something that we are pushing really hard into just at the moment. And so we are trying to look at everything that it's possible to play with. So this house, a private house in the north of England here, is looking at using passive house from an environmental accreditation scheme, but net zero carbon, but also the use of load-bearing stone, the use of straw bales, so what is left over after corn is cut, which is a big product from our agricultural industry, and then mass timber. And we are also looking at things like earth blocks. So this is taking the earth underneath the site that you normally, if you want to create a basement, you normally dig it out and then you put it into landfill somewhere. What we've done here with a scheme in central London next to King's Cross is we've taken that earth and we have given it to a brick manufacturer. We've created a recipe to make earth blocks. We put them back into a building material and then we brought them back to the site where they were excavated from to make the building. So there's no net loss of the original materials. And we're trying to push hard on every typology that we work in, whether it be workplace, symbolically putting one of our largest companies, Jaguar Land Rover, underneath a big timber roof to bring them all together as a community from being split up. There's about 3,500 people who work in that building. And it gives them a kind of sense of being part of something, but also with the timber over their heads, it reminds them of the importance of sustainability. So whether it be a corporate headquarters, whether it be a new type of culture, arts and culture organisation, whatever it might be, the first major net zero carbon hotel in the UK, we're pushing really hard. We've also got some quite interesting occupants in some of our buildings, and that guy in the bottom right-hand corner, that's called Valkyrie, which is a robot Martian that is being developed by University of Edinburgh and NASA in our building in Edinburgh, and that robot will inhabit Mars before we do. So we're already starting to think about not just smarter worlds here, but smarter worlds, elsewhere. We do work in Greece, we do work in India, and wherever we do that work, we're very, very careful to do that as responsibly as we can. So trying to be really careful with the amount of air carbon that we use to visit versus the benefit that we have when we're there. So this is some of the work that we're doing in India at the moment. The scheme on the left-hand side is on site at the moment. And with that scheme, we've got this plus 50-to-1 ratio. Now what that means is for every 1 ton of carbon that I use to get there, through our involvement, through our expertise, we save 50 tons of carbon in the building itself. So that is That is an extraordinary ratio. And we want that ratio to go up to 100 to 1 on our next scheme. But for a starting point, that's not a bad place to be. But we're also leaning, going back to that point about less is more. The scheme on the right is a big research and development facility where we actually worked with the client very hard to try and persuade them to build a smaller building than they asked for, so fewer square meters. But we also listened very carefully to our local colleagues who said, well, look, net zero carbon is one thing, but the big problem that they have there is water. So this scheme is about net zero everything, water, waste, carbon. And the water is the thing that is celebrated at the heart of it. So that big dish is a device that collects water when the monsoon rains fall for 2 months a year, and then those waters are directed into the ground to refill the aquifer that sits underneath the site for the benefit of the company themselves, but also for the benefit of all of the people who live in the local villages. So big ideas, big solutions is what we're trying to always maximize. Coming to Greece and our work here, and some reflections on Sigru, which obviously we completed a year or two ago. The greatest compliment, the thing that means the most to me about that scheme is, it's won lots and lots of awards, but the thing that means the most to me is that Athenian people have said that it feels like an Athenian building. Now that's very special because that's what we set out to try and do by focusing on context, by looking at heritage, by looking at materiality, by looking at climate, and the fact that we seem to have tapped into something which speaks to you as a populace. That's very, very special, and it's a building that we are intensely proud of for that, but also for what it stands for in terms of sustainability. And then we've been experimenting through competitions. This is one that we did, this is starting to think, well, what could a net zero carbon building in Greece look like, feel like? And we explored here an idea of a kind of super roof, which is big a photovoltaic array as we could possibly create, such that the energy that the building needs inside is all generated by the PVs on the roof. And so there is, it's a completely self-sufficient building. It's incredibly lean, it's incredibly pared back, but by playing with geometry, by playing with biodiversity and lovely materials, it's also got a richness. It's got that sort of tapestry and the layering of quality. And then, delighted to have my client from Anatolia College here this evening. This is a piece of work that we're doing there, some visioning, some master planning. To create a new future or a new identity for the college, to rediscover the beauty of the original and to allow nature to thrive once more, as well as doubling the accommodation in parts of the site. But I suppose something that inspires me about, or one of the many things that inspires me about this, is that all of the children who will go through, or the people who will go through that educational establishment, they're potentially the future leaders. And one of the things we're trying to do is to put nature and sustainability right at the heart of the educational experience so that those future leaders learn and hopefully they take some of that thinking forward with them into the future. Just to close, our approach on climate, on working internationally, is climate emergency isn't a United Kingdom problem, it's not a Greece problem, it's not an India problem, it's a global problem. And what we need is the very best brains from wherever they come from to come together, to collaborate, to try and come up with the solutions that will help drive that. And I like to use a phrase which is the 2 + 2 = 5 principle of collaboration. So I bring my 2, you bring your 2, we put them together, they make 5, so the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And that certainly seems to be the case on Sigru, and some of the work we're doing in India as well, that benefit. So hopefully that's given you some kind of an idea of what we're trying to do as a business, what we're trying to say, what more with less is all about. So it's not about giving up, it's just about being much, much more responsible. We cannot carry on as a planet using quite as much material as we currently do. Now, we have put 40 years of hard work into this, and we are determined to carry on. And I think we feel we've been really starting to get somewhere recently. And then this guy comes along. Oh, hold on. Where did that go to? My big moment. You stole my big moment. This guy comes along, and I would argue that whilst the theme of the conference today is about embracing chaos in a smart world, chaos as a kind of positive force, as an energetic force, I'm afraid him and his chums seem to be inciting chaos in order to create a sort of hostile world. And they are starting to row back on a lot of commitments on sustainability, on diversity, and on all sort of aspects of society. Now, if that all stayed within the United States, kind of all right. Let them get on with it. But unfortunately, this is starting to permeate British life as well, and British politics. Even though we've got a Labour government, Reform Party are coming through, and they are making very alarming statements about their intention to, to follow a similar path to what Trump and his mates are doing in America. So it's a time of chaos, it's a time of opportunity, and it's also a time of great caution. We need to watch this guy and what is happening, but we also need to act as quickly as we possibly can to protect the planet. Thank you very much.